The morning sun barely broke through the grimy windows of Davidson's auto repair, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. The shop had been open since 1985, and everyone in the city knew it as the place where impossible car problems went to get solved. Rich folks drove their fancy vintage cars here from 3 states away, trusting Mr. Davidson and his team to work magic on engines that most mechanics wouldn't even touch. But this Monday morning felt different, heavy. You could cut the tension with a knife. Mr. Davidson stood in the middle of the shop floor, his arms crossed, staring at a covered vehicle like it had personally insulted him. At 62 years old, he'd seen just about every car problem imaginable. He'd rebuilt engines blindfolded, or so he claimed after a few beers. He'd diagnosed problems by just listening to an engine idle. His reputation was built on being the guy who never gave up, who always found the answer, except this time, he hadn't. Under that car cover sat a 1967 Ferrari, cherry red, worth more than most people's houses. It had rolled into the shop 5 weeks ago on a flatbed truck, and it hadn't left since. The owner, some investment banker with more money than patience, called every other day asking for updates. And every time, Mr. Davidson had to tell him the same thing: "We're still working on it." The problem seemed simple enough at first. The engine would start fine, run smooth for about 15 minutes, then develop this weird knocking sound. Nothing consistent. Sometimes it would knock 3 times and stop. Sometimes it would knock for 30 seconds straight. Temperature didn't matter. Weather didn't matter. It just did whatever it wanted, whenever it wanted. His lead mechanic, Tom, had pulled the engine apart twice. They'd replaced the timing chain, checked the valves, measured the compression in every cylinder, tested the fuel injectors, swapped out the spark plugs, examined the pistons for scoring. Everything looked perfect, like showroom perfect, but the knocking kept coming back. "All right, everyone gather up," Mr. Davidson called out, his voice rougher than usual. He'd barely slept in 3 days. The mechanics slowly made their way over, wiping their hands on rags, setting down tools. There were 7 of them total, ranging from old Pete, who'd been there since the beginning, to young Danny, who'd just finished his apprenticeship last year. Tom stood at the front, looking tired. He'd taken this Ferrari problem personally, spending his own time after hours trying to figure it out. "We need to talk about the Ferrari," Mr. Davidson said, stating the obvious. "We're 5 weeks in, and we're no closer to fixing it than we were on day 1. The owner is threatening to take it to another shop, which would be embarrassing enough, but he's also talking about telling his collector friends that we couldn't handle it." Pete shifted uncomfortably. "Boss, we've tried everything. I've been doing this for 40 years, and I've never seen anything like it." "That's exactly the problem," Mr. Davidson shot back. "We've tried everything we know. Maybe that's not enough anymore." The shop went quiet. Mr. Davidson rarely admitted defeat, even partially. Tom cleared his throat. "Actually, boss, I might have an idea, but you're probably not going to like it." Everyone turned to look at him. Tom was usually the quiet type, kept his head down, did good work, went home to his family. He wasn't the kind to speak up in meetings unless he had something important to say. "At this point, I'll listen to anything," Mr. Davidson said. Tom hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "My daughter just graduated from State University. Mechanical engineering. Graduated top of her class. She's been applying to shops all over the city, but nobody will hire her because she doesn't have experience. She's only 24. Mr. Davidson's face showed exactly what he thought of that idea before he even opened his mouth. "Tom, no offense to your kid, but we've got decades of experience standing in this room right now, and we can't crack this. What's a fresh graduate going to do? Run some computer simulation? This is real work, not a college project." A few of the other mechanics nodded in agreement. Danny looked uncomfortable, probably because he remembered being the new guy not too long ago. But Tom didn't back down. "Hear me out. She approaches problems differently than we do. She's got equipment and training in diagnostic methods that we don't use here. Metal fatigue analysis, computerized modeling, things like that. I'm not saying she's better than any of us. I'm saying she might see something we're missing because she's looking at it from a completely different angle." "Different angle," Mr. Davidson repeated flatly. "Tom, I've got a Ferrari owner breathing down my neck, and you want me to let a 24-year-old with 0 real-world experience poke around in an $800,000 engine?" "I know how it sounds," Tom admitted. "But we're stuck. Really stuck. And my daughter, she's sharp. I've watched her figure out problems that seemed impossible. She rebuilt my wife's entire car engine when she was 17, diagnosed an issue with our neighbor's truck that 3 shops had missed. She's got a gift for this. Mr. Davidson walked over to the Ferrari, pulled back the cover, and stared at it like he was trying to will it into confessing its secrets. The shop stayed silent, everyone waiting to see what he'd decide. Finally, he turned around and there was something different in his expression. Not quite desperation, but close to it. "Here's what I'll do," he said slowly. "And this goes for everyone here. If Tom's daughter can diagnose this Ferrari problem in 3 days, just diagnose it, not even fix it, I'll hire her on the spot. Full position, full pay, same as anyone else here." Tom's eyes widened. "Boss, I'm not finished," Mr. Davidson cut him off. "But if she can't figure it out, then we all need to accept that we're in over our heads on this one. We'll eat the cost, tell the owner we couldn't solve it, and take the hit to our reputation. Deal?" It wasn't really a question. Mr. Davidson had made up his mind. Tom nodded slowly. "I'll call her right now." "One more thing," Mr. Davidson added, and there was an edge to his voice now. "I'm doing this because I respect you, Tom. You've been with me for 15 years, never let me down once. But I'm going to be honest. I don't think this is going to work. College degrees are fine, but they don't teach you what it feels like when an engine is about to throw a rod, or how to diagnose a problem by the smell of the exhaust. That comes from years in the shop, grease under your fingernails, making mistakes and learning from them." Tom didn't argue. He just pulled out his phone and stepped outside to make the call. The other mechanics dispersed back to their projects, but the conversation didn't stop. Pete came up beside Mr. Davidson, keeping his voice low. "You really gonna let some college kid mess with that Ferrari?" Mr. Davidson sighed. "Honestly, Pete, I don't know what else to do. We've hit a wall. Maybe fresh eyes will help. Or maybe she'll fail in 2 hours and we can move on with a clear conscience. Either way, we're not solving it the way we've been going. What if she breaks something? Then I'll eat that cost too." But Tom wouldn't have suggested this if he thought his daughter would damage the car. He's got too much pride for that. Outside, through the window, they could see Tom pacing as he talked on the phone, gesturing with his free hand the way he always did when he was explaining something technical. The call lasted about 5 minutes before he came back inside. "She'll be here tomorrow morning, 7 sharp, Tom announced. "She's bringing some of her diagnostic equipment from school. They let her borrow it for job interviews." "Tomorrow morning," Mr. Davidson repeated. "All right then. Danny, make sure the Ferrari bay is clear. Tom, you'll be responsible for supervising her, making sure she doesn't damage anything. Everyone else, give her space to work, but keep an eye on things. If she needs help moving heavy equipment or accessing anything, we help her, clear?" A chorus of "Yes, boss" echoed through the shop. That night, nobody worked late. Usually someone was always there past closing, finishing up a project or getting a head start on tomorrow's work. But tonight, everyone left on time, like they needed to go home and process what was about to happen. Tom sat in his truck in the parking lot for a few minutes before driving away, second-guessing his decision. His daughter was brilliant, he knew that. But he'd just put her in a pressure cooker situation, where she'd be proving herself to a room full of skeptical men who'd been doing this work since before she was born. If she succeeded, great, but if she failed, it might crush her confidence right at the start of her career. He pulled out his phone and texted her. "Don't stress about tomorrow. Just do your best. I believe in you." The reply came back almost instantly. "I won't let you down, Dad. Got some ideas already." Back in the shop, Mr. Davidson did one more walk around the Ferrari before locking up. He'd built his entire business on being the best, on solving the problems nobody else could solve. And now he was handing that reputation over to someone who'd never worked a single day in a professional shop. Part of him hoped she'd fail quickly, prove his point that experience mattered more than education, and they could all move on. But another part of him, the part that remembered being young and hungry to prove himself 40 years ago, genuinely hoped she'd find something they'd all missed. The Ferrari sat silent under the fluorescent lights, keeping its secrets for one more night. Tomorrow would either be the beginning of something new at Davidson's Auto Repair, or it would be a very long 3 days ending in disappointment. Either way, everyone would be watching. The whole shop knew that this wasn't just about fixing one car anymore. It was about whether the old ways were still good enough, or if it was time to admit that the world had moved on and left them behind. Mr. Davidson locked the front door, set the alarm, and walked to his car. He sat behind the wheel for a moment, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. Then he laughed just once, shaking his head at the absurdity of it all. A college kid, he muttered to himself. Fixing a Ferrari. What's the world coming to? But deep down, in a place he wasn't ready to admit to anyone, he was curious, really curious. Because if there was one thing his 40 years in this business had taught him, it was that sometimes the answer came from the most unexpected places. Tomorrow morning would tell the story. The shop would open at 7, and Tom's daughter would walk through those doors carrying equipment that probably cost more than Pete's annual salary, ready to prove that book learning could stand up against decades of wrench-turning experience, and every single person in that shop would be watching to see what happened next. Tuesday morning came too, quickly for everyone at Davidson's Auto Repair. By 6:45, every single mechanic was already there, pretending to organize their toolboxes or review work orders, but really just waiting. Nobody wanted to miss this. Tom arrived at 6:50 looking like he hadn't slept much. He kept checking his watch, then checking his phone, then checking his watch again. Mr. Davidson was in his office, but the blinds were open and everyone could see him sitting at his desk, not really working, just watching the parking lot through the window. At exactly 7 o'clock, a blue Honda Civic pulled into the lot. Nothing fancy, probably 10 years old with a university parking sticker still on the back window. Tom's daughter stepped out, and if she was nervous, she didn't show it. She was younger than some of them expected, wearing jeans and a plain black t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. No jewelry, no makeup, just ready to work. But it was what she started unloading from her car that made everyone stop and stare. First came a laptop bag, which was normal enough. Then a large black case that looked like it belonged to a photographer. Then another case, smaller but clearly heavy by the way she carried it. Then a rolling suitcase. Then what looked like a tripod. She made 3 trips back and forth, stacking equipment by the entrance, before Tom finally went out to help her with the last few items. Pete leaned over to Danny. What is all that stuff? Looks like she's setting up a TV studio. Maybe she's going to film the engine, Danny whispered back. You know, for analysis or whatever. Mr. Davidson emerged from his office, his boots heavy on the concrete floor. Everyone straightened up a little, pretending they hadn't been watching through the windows like it was a reality show. Morning, he said, walking up to Tom and his daughter at the entrance. He extended his hand. I'm Mr. Davidson. Your father speaks highly of you. She shook his hand firmly. Good to meet you, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. I know this is unconventional. That's one word for it, Mr. Davidson replied, glancing at the pile of equipment. What exactly did you bring? Diagnostic tools, she said simply. A thermal imaging camera, vibration analysis sensors, a digital oscilloscope, spectroscopy equipment for oil analysis, and my laptop to process everything. Oh, and a high-quality audio recorder. The mechanics exchanged looks. Half of them weren't even sure what some of those things were. Mr. Davidson nodded slowly. All right. The Ferrari is in Bay 3. You've got 3 days. Tom will be here if you need anything. Ground rules. You don't start the engine without someone present. You don't remove any parts without checking with Tom first. And if you're not sure about something, you ask. This car is worth more than all of our annual salaries combined. Understood? Understood, she said, not intimidated in the slightest. Tom helped her carry the equipment to Bay 3 where the Ferrari waited. The other mechanics gradually drifted closer, finding reasons to work on cars in nearby bays, positioning themselves where they could watch without being obvious about it. She spent the first 30 minutes just unpacking and organizing her equipment, setting everything up with careful precision. She placed the laptop on a rolling cart, connected various cables, arranged her tools in a specific order. It looked more like a science lab than a car repair bay. Then she did something nobody expected. She pulled out a notebook, the old-fashioned paper kind, and just stood there looking at the Ferrari, not touching it, not opening the hood, just looking, walking around it slowly, studying it from every angle. She wrote a few notes. Then she crouched down and looked underneath. More notes. She looked at the tires. More notes. This went on for 20 minutes. Pete couldn't help himself. He walked over, trying to seem casual. Need any help getting started? She looked up from her notebook. Not yet, thank you. Just doing the initial visual assessment. Visual assessment, Pete repeated. We've had this engine apart twice. Not sure what you're going to see from the outside. She smiled politely. Sometimes the context tells you as much as the internals. Tire wear patterns, fluid levels, even how the car sits can indicate underlying issues. Pete nodded like he understood, but his face showed he thought this was a waste of time. He walked back to his bay and muttered to the others, "She's been here 45 minutes and hasn't even touched a wrench." By 10 o'clock, she still hadn't opened the hood. Instead, she'd been reading through all the service records, every note the mechanics had made, every part they'd replaced, every test they'd run. She had the documents spread out on the cart next to her laptop, comparing notes, creating what looked like a timeline. Mr. Davidson walked by, stopped, looked at the untouched Ferrari, then looked at her buried in paperwork. "Something wrong with the car's exterior?" he asked, trying to keep the skepticism out of his voice. "Just building a complete picture," she replied, not looking up. "You and your team have already done extensive mechanical analysis. I need to understand everything you've tried so I don't just repeat the same tests." "That paperwork has been available since day one," Mr. Davidson pointed out. "I know, but I need to process it my way. Create a diagnostic framework before I start hands-on work. Otherwise, I'm just guessing randomly." Mr. Davidson walked away, shaking his head. He caught Tom's eye across the shop. Tom just shrugged, but he didn't look worried. Around 11:30, she finally opened the hood. But again, she didn't start pulling things apart. She set up her thermal camera on a tripod, positioned it to point at the engine, then connected it to her laptop. Then she placed several small devices around the engine bay, little black boxes with blinking lights. "Vibration sensors," she explained when she noticed Tom watching. "They'll record any movement or oscillation in three-dimensional space. The thermal camera will show heat distribution patterns. I want to capture data while the engine is running." "Makes sense," Tom said, even though he'd never diagnosed a car this way in his life. She looked at him seriously. "Dad, I need you to understand something. I might not find anything. This could be a complete waste of 3 days. Your coworkers already think I'm wasting time, and they might be right." "They don't think that," Tom lied. "Yes, they do. I can feel them watching. But I can't work their way. I have to do this my way, even if it looks strange, even if it fails." Tom put his hand on her shoulder. "I didn't suggest you for this because I thought you'd do it their way. I suggested you because you think differently. So think differently. That's all anyone can ask." She nodded, taking a deep breath. "Okay, let's start the engine." Tom called Mr. Davidson over. The three of them stood around the Ferrari as she made final adjustments to her equipment. She put on a set of professional headphones connected to several microphones she'd positioned around the engine. "Whenever you're ready," Mr. Davidson said. She started the laptop recording program, checked that all her sensors were active, then nodded to Tom. He turned the key. The Ferrari engine came to life with that distinctive Italian purr. Beautiful, smooth, perfect. She stood there motionless, eyes closed, listening through her headphones. Her laptop screen showed colorful graphs and waveforms that meant nothing to anyone watching. The thermal camera displayed the engine in shades of red, orange, and yellow, showing heat spreading through the metal. They let it run for 5 minutes. Nothing happened. No knocking, no problems, just a perfect engine doing what it was supposed to do. 10 minutes. 12 minutes. Still perfect. Then, at 14 minutes and 30 seconds, there it was. A faint knocking sound, irregular, coming from somewhere deep in the engine. Mr. Davidson tensed. This was it, the problem that had haunted them for 5 weeks. But she didn't react. She just stood there, eyes still closed, listening intently. The knocking continued for maybe 20 seconds, then stopped. The engine returned to its smooth purr. "Kill it," she said quietly. Tom shut off the engine. She immediately pulled off her headphones and went to her laptop, typing rapidly, pulling up different screens, zooming in on specific parts of the data. "Did you hear it?" Mr. Davidson asked. "I heard it," she confirmed, not taking her eyes off the screen. "But more importantly, I recorded it. Give me a few hours to analyze this data. What do you think it is?" He pressed. She finally looked up at him. "I think it's not what you think it is. But I need to be sure before I say anything. Can we run the test again this afternoon? I want to capture more data points." "Sure," Mr. Davidson said, though he looked frustrated. "You're the one on the clock." Over lunch, the shop was buzzing with conversation. None of the mechanics had been invited to watch the test, but word had spread quickly. She just stood there with headphones on. Pete told the others. Didn't even touch the engine. Just recorded it on her computer. What's she going to do, email the problem to the manufacturer? Someone joked and a few others laughed. But Danny, the youngest, spoke up. I don't know, guys. My buddy in tech does sound analysis for industrial equipment. He can detect bearing failures before they happen, just by listening to the frequencies. Maybe she's doing something similar. This is a Ferrari, not a factory machine, Pete countered. You fix these with skill and experience, not graphs on a computer. In Bay 3, Tom's daughter ate her lunch while reviewing the data on her laptop. She'd created multiple graphs showing sound frequencies, vibration patterns, and heat distribution over time. She kept going back to one specific moment, the 14-minute mark, examining it from every angle her sensors had captured. Tom brought her a bottle of water. How's it looking? Interesting, she said, which told him nothing. The pattern doesn't match what I expected. That's good, actually. It means we're dealing with something unusual. The guys are talking, Tom said carefully. Some of them think this is a waste of time. I know, and they might be right. But Dad, look at this. She turned the laptop screen so he could see a graph covered in colored lines that looked like abstract art. This is the sound frequency analysis. When the knocking happens, look at these peaks here and here and here. They're too regular. Too precise. What does that mean? I'm not sure yet. But mechanical failures are usually chaotic. Random, this has a pattern to it. Like something is being triggered rather than failing. Tom didn't fully understand, but he trusted her instincts. What's next? I need to run the engine again, but this time I want to collect an oil sample while it's knocking. The spectroscopy equipment can tell me if there are metal particles in the oil, and if so, what kind of metal. That'll tell me what's wearing down inside. They ran the test 3 more times that afternoon. Each time she collected more data, adjusted her sensors, tried different recording techniques. By 5 o'clock, she'd accumulated hours of recordings and hundreds of data points. The other mechanics left for the day, most of them convinced that tomorrow would bring the same results. A lot of fancy equipment and no actual diagnosis. Mr. Davidson stopped by Bay 3 before heading home. Making progress? He asked. She looked exhausted but determined. Yes, actually. I'm seeing patterns in the data that suggest this isn't a typical mechanical failure, but I need tonight to process everything and form a proper hypothesis. A hypothesis, Mr. Davidson repeated. In my day, we called that a hunch. She smiled tiredly. A hunch backed by thermal imaging, frequency analysis, and spectroscopy data. But yes, essentially a hunch. You've got 2 more days, he reminded her. Don't spend it all staring at a computer screen. After he left, Tom stayed behind with his daughter. She was transferring files, organizing her data, preparing for a long night of analysis. You should go home, Dad. Mom's probably waiting dinner on you. I'll stay a bit longer, Tom said, just in case you need help with anything. I'm not going to find the answer tonight, she said honestly, but I'm going to find out where to look for it tomorrow. That's half the battle. Tom watched her work. This daughter he'd taught to change oil when she was 12. Who'd rebuilt her first engine at 17, who'd chosen to study engineering even though everyone told her it was a man's field. She'd always been stubborn, always insisted on doing things her own way. They're all waiting for you to fail, Tom said quietly. You know that, right? I know. Doesn't that bother you? She looked up from her laptop and there was steel in her eyes. Dad, I've been waiting for people to watch me fail since I was the only girl in freshman engineering. I'm used to it. But here's what they don't understand. Failure is just data. If I can't solve this Ferrari problem, I'll learn something valuable, and eventually, that knowledge will help me solve something else. So let them watch. Either way, I'm learning. Tom smiled, proud in a way that had nothing to do with the Ferrari. Your mother and I raised you right. You raised me to be curious and persistent, she corrected. Right now, that's all I need. That night, long after everyone else had gone home, a single light remained on in Bay 3. Behind her laptop screen, Tom's daughter worked through gigabytes of data, looking for the pattern that would explain what 7 experienced mechanics had missed. The Ferrari sat silent beside her, holding its secret just a little longer. But tomorrow was a new day, and she'd be ready with a theory that would surprise everyone. She just had to find it first. Wednesday morning felt different. Tom's daughter arrived at 6:30, a full half hour before anyone else, carrying a folder thick with printed graphs and notes. She'd been up until 2 in the morning analyzing data, and her eyes showed it. But there was an energy about her that hadn't been there yesterday. The kind of energy someone gets when they're onto something. She went straight to Bay 3 and started setting up her equipment again, but this time with more purpose, more focus. She knew exactly what she was looking for now. When the other mechanics started arriving, they noticed the change immediately. Yesterday she'd seemed almost casual, methodical but unhurried. Today she moved like someone with a mission. Tom got there at 6:45 and found his daughter on her hands and knees under the Ferrari, shining a flashlight at something, taking photos with her phone. "Morning," he said. "You look like you didn't sleep." 4 hours, she replied, not coming out from under the car. "But I think I know what direction to look. Dad, can you get Mr. Davidson? I need to show him something, and I need to ask permission to remove some parts." Tom felt his heart rate pick up. "You found something?" "Maybe. Probably. I need to confirm it physically." Within 10 minutes, Mr. Davidson was standing in Bay 3, coffee in hand, looking at Tom's daughter like he couldn't quite figure her out. She had her laptop open, showing him a series of graphs that meant absolutely nothing to him. "See these spikes here?" She pointed at the screen. "This is the sound frequency analysis from yesterday. The knocking sound has a very specific frequency signature, and it appears at almost exactly the same intervals each time, 14 to 15 minutes after the engine reaches operating temperature." "We know when it happens," Mr. Davidson said, trying to be patient. "What we need to know is why." "I'm getting there," she said, pulling up another screen. "This is the thermal imaging. Look at this area here." She pointed to a spot on the heat map. "Every time right before the knocking starts, there's a small temperature spike in this specific region. It's subtle, only about 3 degrees, but it's consistent." Mr. Davidson leaned closer. "That's near the camshaft area." "Exactly. Now look at this." She pulled up a third screen. "This is the oil analysis. I collected samples at different times during the engine run. The spectroscopy shows microscopic metal particles in the oil, which you'd expect from normal wear, but the concentration increases slightly right after each knocking episode. And here's the interesting part. The metal composition doesn't quite match the specifications for original Ferrari parts from 1967. The room went very quiet. Tom felt something cold settle in his stomach. Mr. Davidson set his coffee down slowly. "What are you saying?" Mr. Davidson asked carefully. "I'm saying that something inside this engine isn't original, and whatever it is, it's failing in a very specific way. The metal fatigue is causing microfractures that expand when they reach a certain temperature, which creates the knocking sound. But the pattern is too uniform for this to be random failure. It's almost like it was designed to fail slowly, to hide something." Mr. Davidson stared at her. "Designed to fail? That doesn't make any sense." "I know it sounds strange," she admitted, "but the data is really clear. I need to look at the camshaft directly. If my theory is correct, I'll find stress fractures that are too uniform, too precise to be natural wear." Tom spoke up. "Boss, if she's right, if there's a counterfeit part in there—" "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Mr. Davidson cut him off, but his face had gone pale. A fake part in an $800,000 Ferrari wasn't just a mechanical problem. It was a fraud problem, a legal problem, the kind of problem that could destroy reputations and tank property values. "I could be completely wrong," she said quickly. "This is just a hypothesis based on data analysis. I need to physically inspect the parts to confirm anything." Mr. Davidson was quiet for a long moment, thinking through the implications. Finally, he nodded. "All right. Tom, you supervise the disassembly. Be careful and document everything with photos. If there's even a chance she's right about this, we need a complete record." Word spread through the shop like wildfire. The college kid with all the fancy equipment thought she'd found something. A counterfeit part. In a Ferrari. The mechanics gathered in small groups, talking in low voices, some skeptical, some curious, all of them paying attention now. Tom and his daughter spent the next 2 hours carefully removing parts to access the camshaft. She photographed every step, measured everything, treated each component like evidence at a crime scene. Other mechanics found reasons to drift by, pretending to grab tools from nearby, stealing glances at what was happening. Pete watched from 2 bays over, arms crossed. "She's going to look real silly when that camshaft turns out to be perfectly fine," he muttered to Danny. But Danny wasn't so sure anymore. "I don't know, man. She seems pretty confident. And all that data she collected, that's not just guessing. Data," Pete scoffed. "I can look at an engine and tell you what's wrong by the sound it makes." Don't need a computer for that. Then why couldn't we figure this one out? Danny asked quietly. Pete didn't have an answer for that. By 11 o'clock, they had the camshaft removed and lying on a clean work mat. It looked perfect to the naked eye. Smooth, polished, no visible damage. Tom's daughter pulled out a device that looked like a small microscope and connected it to her laptop. This is a digital microscope, she explained to her father and Mr. Davidson, who'd returned to watch. It can magnify up to 200 times and show details invisible to the human eye. If there are microfractures in the metal, this will find them. She carefully examined the camshaft, section by section, with the microscope. The laptop screen showed extreme close-ups of the metal surface. For a while, everything looked normal. Smooth metal, some minor surface scratches consistent with regular use, nothing alarming. Then she found it. There, she said softly, adjusting the focus. Dad, Mr. Davidson, look at this. On the screen they could see what looked like tiny spiderweb patterns in the metal. Hairline fractures, barely visible even at high magnification, running in almost parallel lines along one section of the camshaft. Those are stress fractures, she said. But look at the pattern. They're too uniform. Natural metal fatigue from use would create random, chaotic cracking. This looks almost geometric. She moved the microscope to another section of the camshaft. More fractures, same pattern. Another section. Same thing. Mr. Davidson leaned in close to the screen, his expression grim. Could this be from a manufacturing defect? Something that happened when the part was made? Possibly, she said. But Ferrari's quality control in the 60s was exceptional. These stress patterns suggest the metal isn't the right composition for the application. It's too soft, can't handle the heat and pressure cycling. A proper camshaft shouldn't show this kind of wear after 50-plus years. She pulled out another device, a handheld spectrometer. This can analyze the elemental composition of the metal. If it's an original Ferrari part, it should match the specifications from the manufacturer. She pointed the device at the camshaft, pressed a button, and waited. Numbers appeared on the small screen. She compared them to something on her laptop, and her face told the story before she said anything. The alloy composition is wrong, she said quietly. It's close but not exact. The carbon content is lower than it should be, and there are trace elements here that shouldn't be present in a proper high-performance camshaft. The implication hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. You're telling me this is a fake, Mr. Davidson said, and it wasn't a question. I'm telling you this isn't an original Ferrari part, she corrected carefully. Whether it's a counterfeit made to deceive someone or just a replacement part made by a manufacturer that cut corners, I can't say. But it's definitely not what should be in this engine. Tom ran his hand through his hair. How is that even possible? Wouldn't someone have noticed during previous maintenance? Not necessarily, she said. It looks perfect to the naked eye. If you're just doing routine maintenance, changing oil, checking compression, you'd never catch it. You'd have to do metallurgical analysis, which nobody does on a regular service. And the way it's failing is clever. The stress fractures cause knocking that mimics other problems. Valve issues, timing problems, bearing wear. You could chase those symptoms forever without finding the real cause. Mr. Davidson walked away from the Ferrari, then walked back, then walked away again. He looked like a man who'd just been told his house was built on a sinkhole. This is bad, he said finally. This is really bad. If this car has a counterfeit part, the owner needs to know. His insurance needs to know. And if this happened during a previous restoration, we need to find out when and where. There's more, she said hesitantly. If someone went to the trouble of creating a counterfeit camshaft this sophisticated, something that would pass casual inspection, they probably did it for high-value vehicles. This might not be the only one. The weight of that statement settled over everyone within earshot. Pete had moved closer, no longer pretending not to listen. Danny stood beside him, eyes wide. Even the mechanics working in other bays had stopped what they were doing. We need to call the owner, Tom said. Not yet, Mr. Davidson replied. First, I need to be absolutely certain. No offense to your daughter, but if we make this accusation and we're wrong, we're done. Finished. No shop in the country would trust us. He turned to her directly. You said this is your hypothesis based on data. How confident are you? She met his eyes steadily. Based on the stress fracture patterns, the metallurgical analysis, and the correlation with the thermal and acoustic data, 95% confident. The only way to be 100% certain would be to send this camshaft to an independent laboratory for full analysis, which would take days or weeks, But you believe this is a counterfeit part? Yes, sir, I do. Mr. Davidson pulled out his phone and walked to his office. Through the window, they could see him making a call, pacing back and forth, talking with animated hand gestures. The conversation lasted 10 minutes. When he came back, his expression was set and determined. I called the owner, he said. Told him we found something unusual and needed to investigate further. He's coming in tomorrow morning with his insurance representative. I also called a metallurgical lab downtown. They can do an expedited analysis if we bring them the part today. It'll cost a fortune, but we need to be sure. He looked at Tom's daughter. You're coming with me to the lab. I need you to explain your findings to their engineers. Of course, she said. Pete, Mr. Davidson called out. You're in charge while I'm gone. Nobody touches that Ferrari. Nobody even looks at it funny. Clear? Clear, boss, Pete replied. And for once, his voice held no skepticism. Mr. Davidson carefully wrapped the camshaft in protective material and placed it in a case. Tom's daughter packed up her laptop and the data she'd collected. As they headed for the door, she turned back to her father. Dad, whatever happens, I need you to know I did my best. I know you did, Tom said, and his voice was thick with emotion. You did better than anyone could have expected. After they left, the shop remained unusually quiet. The mechanics worked on their projects, but the usual banter was gone. Everyone was processing what they'd just witnessed. Danny approached Pete, keeping his voice low. Think she's right? About the counterfeit? Pete was quiet for a long moment, staring at the empty bay where the Ferrari sat. Partially disassembled, its secret finally exposed. Yeah, he said finally. I think she is. And I think we all owe her an apology for doubting her. She proved us wrong with science, Danny said. No, Pete corrected. She proved us wrong by being thorough, by not assuming she knew the answer before she looked for it. That's something we could all learn from, college degree or not. Tom stood by Bay 3, looking at the scattered parts, the diagnostic equipment, the careful documentation his daughter had maintained. She'd walked into a room full of skeptics and, through patience and methodology, found something they'd all missed. But the real test was still coming. Tomorrow the owner would arrive. The lab would deliver their results, and everyone would find out if the college kid with the fancy equipment had really uncovered something huge, or if this was all an expensive mistake. Either way, nothing at Davidson's Auto Repair would ever be quite the same again. The old certainties had been shaken. The assumption that experience alone was enough had been challenged. And somewhere in the city, in a professional laboratory, technicians were beginning their analysis of a camshaft that might just rewrite the history of one very expensive Ferrari and possibly expose a fraud that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. The clock was ticking toward tomorrow morning, and everyone was waiting to see what the truth would reveal. Thursday morning arrived with a tension that made everyone's coffee taste bitter. The lab had called Mr. Davidson at 8 the previous evening with their preliminary findings, and he'd spent half the night on the phone with lawyers, insurance adjusters, and the Ferrari's owner. Nobody in the shop knew exactly what was said, but Mr. Davidson's grim expression when he arrived at 6 that morning told them plenty. Tom's daughter was already there, setting up her laptop with all the documentation she'd compiled. Every graph, every measurement, every photograph organized into a presentation that could be understood by people who didn't speak engineering. She'd changed her approach today, wearing a button-up shirt instead of her usual t-shirt, her hair neatly styled. This wasn't just about fixing a car anymore. This was about presenting evidence. Owner's coming at 9, Mr. Davidson told her. His name is Mr. Pemberton. He'll have his insurance representative with him and possibly a lawyer. The lab is sending over their full report by email at 8:30. You ready for this? As ready as I'll ever be, she admitted. How much trouble am I in if I'm wrong? You're not wrong, Mr. Davidson said flatly. The lab confirmed everything. The camshaft is a sophisticated counterfeit, made from inferior metal alloy. They dated it to sometime between 1995 and 2005, based on the manufacturing techniques and material composition. Someone swapped out the original part during a restoration and hoped nobody would notice. Tom had been listening from a few feet away. He walked over, relief and pride mixing on his face. So she was right. About all of it. Every single detail, Mr. Davidson confirmed. The lab guys were impressed. Said her analysis was as thorough as anything they would have done. Maybe more so because she correlated multiple data sources. They want to know what university she went to. She looked down, embarrassed by the praise. I just followed the evidence. You did more than that, Mr. Davidson said. You found something that's been hiding for probably 20 years. That takes skill and instinct, not just equipment. By 8:45, the shop had been transformed. Mr. Davidson had cleared out the small conference room they used for customer meetings, set up chairs, and brought in the Ferrari's complete service history going back to when Mr. Pemberton purchased it in 2003. The camshaft, now returned from the lab, sat in a clear evidence bag with the official analysis report. The mechanics were all pretending to work, but everyone was watching the parking lot. Even Pete had positioned himself where he could see the entrance. At precisely 9 o'clock, a black Mercedes pulled up. Mr. Pemberton stepped out first, a man in his late 60s wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Behind him came a woman in business attire carrying a leather briefcase, the insurance representative. And behind her, a younger man with a tablet, likely the lawyer. Mr. Davidson met them at the door, shook hands, exchanged pleasantries that everyone could tell were forced. Then he led them to the conference room where Tom and his daughter waited. The introductions were brief and professional. Mr. Pemberton looked tired, like he hadn't slept either. The insurance rep, Ms. Chen, had the neutral expression of someone who dealt with bad news for a living. The lawyer, whose name nobody quite caught, just observed everything silently. Thank you for coming on short notice, Mr. Davidson began. I know this is concerning, but I wanted you to see the evidence in person rather than trying to explain it over the phone. You said there's a problem with the camshaft, Mr. Pemberton said, getting straight to the point. A counterfeit part. I need to understand what that means for my vehicle and my collection. Mr. Davidson gestured to Tom's daughter. This is Tom's daughter. She's the one who discovered the issue. I'm going to let her walk you through what she found. All eyes turned to her. She took a breath and opened her laptop, projecting the first slide onto the screen Mr. Davidson had set up. Thank you for coming, she started, her voice steady despite the pressure. I'm going to explain what I found, how I found it, and what it means. Please stop me if you have questions. She walked them through the entire process, the initial symptoms that had stumped the shop for weeks, her decision to take a data-driven diagnostic approach, the thermal imaging that showed unusual heat patterns, the acoustic analysis revealing two perfect frequency patterns, the oil spectroscopy detecting wrong metal compositions, the microscopic examination revealing geometric stress fractures, and finally the metallurgical lab results confirming the camshaft was made from inferior materials, inconsistent with Ferrari specifications from 1967. Mr. Pemberton's face grew darker with each slide. Ms. Chen took notes constantly. The lawyer asked several pointed questions about her methodology, which she answered with calm precision. When she finished, the room was silent for a long moment. How certain are you? Mr. Pemberton finally asked. She pulled up the lab report. The metallurgical lab gives it a 99% certainty. The alloy composition, manufacturing technique, and age of the part all confirm it's a counterfeit. Made sometime between 1995 and 2005, your vehicle's service history shows it underwent a major restoration in 2001. Ms. Chen leaned forward. Do you have the name of the shop that performed that restoration? Tom had been ready for this question. He slid a folder across the table. Complete records. The restoration was done by a shop called Moretti's Classic Auto, located about 40 miles from here. They specialized in Italian sports cars. The shop closed in 2008. Convenient, the lawyer muttered. There's more, Mr. Davidson added carefully. We made some calls yesterday. Moretti's was run by a mechanic named Vincent Moretti. He died in 2010, but before his shop closed, there were rumors in the collector community about authenticity issues with some of his restorations. Nothing was ever proven. Mr. Pemberton closed his eyes. How many cars did he restore? Records show at least 40 high-value vehicles over 15 years. Mostly Ferraris, some Maseratis, a few Lamborghinis. The implications settled over the room like a heavy blanket. If one counterfeit part had been used, there could be more. If it happened to one car, it probably happened to others. This wasn't just about a single Ferrari anymore. Ms. Chen was already on her phone, typing rapidly. I'm alerting our fraud investigation department. Mr. Pemberton, your policy covers this situation, but we'll need to authenticate your entire collection. Every vehicle you own that passed through that restoration shop needs to be examined. I have 6 cars from Moretti's, Mr. Pemberton said quietly, including a 1963 Ferrari GTO that's worth... He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. We can help with that, Tom's daughter spoke up. Everyone looked at her. The methodology I used here can be applied to other vehicles. Thermal imaging, acoustic analysis, spectroscopy. They're non-destructive tests that can identify suspect parts without disassembling engines. If you need vehicles authenticated, I can create a diagnostic protocol. Ms. Chen looked interested. How long would it take to test a vehicle? For a thorough analysis? 2 days per car, 1 day for data collection, 1 day for analysis and physical inspection of suspect components. And you can train others in this methodology? Yes. The equipment is commercially available and the analysis techniques can be taught. It's time-consuming but not complicated. Mr. Pemberton looked at her with a mixture of frustration and respect. You're 24 years old and you just potentially discovered one of the biggest authenticity frauds in collector car history. How did you know to look for this? She chose her words carefully. I didn't know to look for it specifically, but the data showed patterns that didn't make sense for normal mechanical failure. The knocking was too precise, too predictable. In engineering, when something fails in a predictable pattern, it usually means the design is wrong or the materials are wrong. Your mechanics had already ruled out design issues, so that left materials. Once I started looking at the metallurgy, everything else fell into place. 7 experienced mechanics looked at this car for 5 weeks, Mr. Pemberton said. Why didn't they find it? Mr. Davidson answered that one. Because we were looking for a mechanical failure. A worn bearing, a timing issue, something that breaks through normal use. We weren't looking for fraud. That requires a different mindset, different tools, and honestly, suspicion we didn't have. Your Ferrari is impeccably maintained. We had no reason to doubt that every part was authentic. The lawyer had been reviewing the lab report on his tablet. This is going to get complicated. If Moretti installed counterfeit parts knowingly, that's fraud. If he did it unknowingly, using parts from a supplier who was counterfeiting, that's a supply chain issue that could involve manufacturers, importers, distributors. We could be looking at litigation that spans multiple countries and decades. What about my car? Mr. Pemberton asked, the frustration clear in his voice. Can it be fixed? Yes, Mr. Davidson said. We can source an authentic camshaft. It won't be cheap and it'll take time to verify authenticity, but we can restore the vehicle to proper specifications. And the value? Ms. Chen answered that one. Depends on disclosure. If you repair it with authenticated parts and disclose the history, you'll take a hit but not catastrophic. If other Moretti restorations turn out to have similar issues, there might actually be a premium for